Before the zombies, before the mansion, there was fear and a dream. In 1993, a young Capcom designer named Shinji Mikami was obsessed with an old Nintendo game called Sweet Home, a creepy 8-bit horror title-based game on a Japanese film. It had one house, one group of survivors, and one mission: stay alive. That concept, a haunted house where you never knew what was behind the next door, became the seed for something bigger. Capcom wanted a 3D horror experience for the new PlayStation console. Something cinematic, something new. Mikami drew from Night of the Living Dead and The Shining, building a claustrophobic atmosphere, tight camera angles, eerie silence, and door-opening cutscenes that made every hallway feel deadly. The project started small, almost forgotten inside Capcom's development labs. The working title? Biohazard. But when they tried to register that name in America, it was already taken, so they renamed it Resident Evil. In 1996, it hit PlayStation like a thunderclap. Polygonal characters, real actors in the opening cinematic, B-movie dialogue, and zombies that didn't just appear, they lurched towards you. Players had never seen anything like it. It wasn't just a game, it was a nightmare that you could play. This was the moment survival horror was born. When Resident Evil dropped in 1996, nobody knew what hit them. It wasn't just a PlayStation game, it was an experience. You didn't run and gun, you crept. You rationed bullets. You heard moans through static, and every door creak felt like a death sentence. Word spread fast. Resident Evil became a cult obsession. Magazines plastered screenshots of grotesque monsters across their pages. Kids traded stories at school about zombie dogs crashing through windows and that one save room song that made you feel safe for 30 seconds. Capcom realized they had tapped into something primal. Fear sold, and players wanted more. By 1998, Resident Evil 2 dropped. Bigger, louder, more cinematic. Leon Kennedy and Claire Redfield entered a city overrun by the T-Virus, and the series leveled up overnight. The graphics improved. The story deepened, and suddenly, this wasn't just a horror game. It was a global franchise. Merch, movies, action figures, strategy guides. Resident Evil became a brand. Fans lined up at midnight to get copies. Game stores dimmed their lights for zombie launch events. And critics couldn't stop talking about how it changed the rules of fear in gaming. It wasn't about winning anymore. It was about surviving. The PlayStation became the house that Resident Evil built. Mikami and Capcom had sparked a movement. Survival horror wasn't a niche anymore. It was mainstream. And just as the world was starting to catch its breath, Capcom was already planning its next experiment. By the late 1990s, Resident Evil wasn't just a game. It was a cultural phenomenon. With Resident Evil 3, Nemesis, in 1999, and the lingering fame of RE2, the series hit its golden era. Fans were obsessed, merch flying off the shelves, and the franchise had become a benchmark for cinematic horror in gaming. The genius of this period wasn't just zombies or gore, it was tension. Capcom had perfected that every step could be your last formula. Ammo was scarce, maps were cryptic, and Nemesis, a relentless bioengineered weapon, turned pursuers into legends. Players didn't just play, they lived in fear. This was also the era when Resident Evil transcended gaming. The first live-action movie was in 2002, and it wasn't just a tie-in. It was proof that the series had mainstream appeal. Claire and Leon were icons, and the mansion had become a symbol of survival horror everywhere. Capcom wasn't resting. They were innovating. New enemies, more complex puzzles, and more cinematic storytelling pushed the series to new heights that no one had ever seen before. It wasn't just a game to beat. It was a game to experience. By now, Resident Evil had an identity. Tension over action, atmosphere over speed, and fear over fun. Every sequel tried to outdo the last, and for a moment, Capcom had the horror genre cornered. But as the series peaked, cracks started to show. Fan expectations were skyrocketing, budgets were ballooning, and the pressure to deliver bigger scares threatened the very thing that made the game special: pure survival terror. By the early 2000s, Resident Evil stood tall, but the shadows were growing. Fans wanted innovation, not repetition. The formula that once felt revolutionary, fixed cameras, tank controls, limited ammo, was starting to show its age. Resident Evil Code Veronica in 2000 and Resident Evil 0 in 2002 kept the vibe alive, but didn't capture the same spark. Gamers were shifting toward faster, flashier titles. The horror genre itself was changing, and Capcom knew it. Then came Resident Evil 4. Shinji Mikami returned to the director's chair and threw everything out the window. Over-the-shoulder aiming, fluid combat, dynamic enemies that dodged bullets and flanked you. It wasn't the slow dread of the mansion anymore. It was chaos in motion, and it worked. Resident Evil 4 in 2005 became a masterpiece, not just for horror, but for gaming as a whole. It defined modern third-person shooters and revitalized the series overnight. But it also pushed Resident Evil to the edge of its identity. The balance between fear and firepower started to tip. As the sequels followed, Resident Evil 5 and 6, the franchise started to lean hard into action. Explosions replaced eerie silence. Zombies were replaced with soldiers and mutants. It was still fun, but not scary. The fans were divided. Some loved the new adrenaline, others mourned the death of true survival horror. The series had evolved, but at what cost? It wasn't the quiet horror game that made you feel dread at every door. It was a blockbuster spectacle. By the late 2000s, Resident Evil had gone Hollywood, but not in the way that fans had hoped. The games were louder, flashier, and packed with explosions that would make Michael Bay blush. The fear was gone. Resident Evil 5 in 2009 was technically impressive, but tonally, it had shifted completely. Co-op gameplay replaced isolation. Players traded scares for set pieces, and the franchise that once made your pulse race now made your controller rumble. It sold millions, but longtime fans could feel something dying under the success. Then came Resident Evil 6. Massive budget, multiple storylines, aiming for action blockbuster status. But the result was chaos. Bloated design, uneven tone, and loss of focus. Critics hammered it. Fans called it the death of Resident Evil. The fear, the subtlety, the claustrophobic tension, gone. Meanwhile, the movie series starring Mila Jovovich had taken over the brand's image. While the films found success at the box office, they strayed even further from the source material. Zombies became background noise, replaced by clone labs, superpowers, and laser grids. The games and the films blurred together, both stylish, both loud, both hollow. By 2013, the Resident Evil name still sold, but the soul of the series had vanished. Horror had moved on. Indie games like Amnesia and Outlast reminded players what true terror felt like. Capcom had hit rock bottom. The franchise that invented survival horror had become what it once warned us about, a monster of its own making. By 2015, Resident Evil had become a ghost of itself, still alive, but unrecognizable. The action-heavy sequels had stripped away the heart of the franchise, and the fans who once whispered about locked doors and chasm hallways had gone silent. Capcom was at a crossroads, evolve again or fade away. Then came the shockwave, Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Released in 2017, it didn't just reboot the series, it resurrected it. Gone were the big explosions and global conspiracies. In their place, one house, one man, and one family, the Baker Estate, a rotting Louisiana nightmare that felt like a playable horror film. Capcom switched to a first-person perspective, a bold risk that terrified players in a brand new way. No cinematic angles, no distance, you were in it. You felt every creak beneath the floorboards, every breath behind your shoulder. The fear was back, and it worked. Critics hailed it as a masterpiece of modern horror. Players who had grown up with the originals felt the same pulse and dread they had felt in 1996. It wasn't just a comeback, it was redemption. Then Capcom doubled down. The Resident Evil 2 remake in 2019 and Resident Evil 3 remake in 2020 brought the classics back to life with stunning detail. Nostalgia and innovation finally balanced. The series was reborn. Once again, Resident Evil defined what horror could be, reinventing itself for a new generation without forgetting what made it special. Nearly 30 years later, Resident Evil stands as one of gaming's greatest survivors, a franchise that's been reborn, reimagined, and redefined across generations. Few series have stared death in the face so many times and came back stronger. From the door-opening cutscenes to its modern photoreal nightmares, Resident Evil has always been more than a game. It's a reflection of fear itself, how it changes, how it evolves, and how we keep coming back for more. The legacy lives in moments burned into the minds of gamers. The zombie turning its head for the first time in the mansion. The crash of glass as dogs burst through the window. Leon's first day in Raccoon City. The eerie hum of a save room. The first time you stepped into the Baker house. Each era brought new nightmares, new technology, and new ways to be afraid. And the influence is everywhere. Modern horror owes its atmosphere, pacing, and psychology to what Resident Evil pioneered. Games like The Last of Us, Dead Space, and Alan Wake all echo to Capcom's blueprint, fear that feels human. Today, Resident Evil isn't just surviving, it's thriving. Village carried the torch into a new decade, merging gothic fantasy and grounded terror. Remakes continue to prove that nostalgia can still evolve. And through every generation, Capcom's message remains clear. The monster isn't the point. Survival is. From the eerie mansion halls to the dim glow of a PS5 screen, Resident Evil has done the impossible. It's turned fear into a legacy. Because true horror doesn't fade. It adapts, it mutates, and it comes back. And no matter how many times we escape, we always come back to that mansion door.